The views and opinions expressed on any program are those of the producers and/or the persons appearing on the program, and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of FRC Media, Bristol Community College, or the City of Fall River.
Well, hello. Welcome to Spindle City Straight Talk. I'm Chip.
And I'm CJ.
And it's Monday in the Riv. And
another stabbing.
Another stabbing. DA, Channel 7 Boston Live News. 15-year-old girl fatally stabbed 68-year-old woman in Fall River apartment at 220 Johnson Street, otherwise known as, drum roll,
Hillside Manor, previously, now Father DeFario.
Now Father DeFario.
Changing its name did not improve its reputation.
True. And I am sure, that many of those residents came in from outside our area. So we can check into that.
Well, it's interesting because
pretty sure that that the individuals involved in this case, and it's tragic. I think this morning's news said it was her grandmother.
No, she was staying with she was a grandmother. She lived with her grandson, I think it was.
Well, there were two juveniles involved, and one was the grandson or granddaughter of one of the, of course, the news was still a little sketchy, but maybe the one who did the stabbing wasn't the grandchild, but well, whatever it is, it's ridiculous. This is all too common occurrence, and I guess we're going to have to outlaw knives too, because recently Providence had a fatal stabbing. They're still talking about it at a hookah lounge, and I guess the implement of destruction is now the knife, the go-to implement. Even though we all know statistically more people were killed by hammers than by guns, and that again weighs heavily on when you listen to the merits of people thinking that banning guns will stop murders. And if they're talking about mass murders, well, you can go online and learn how to build a bomb. So it would be even worse.
Yeah, the interesting part about this case is that I guess because of her age, they're going to have her arraignment in a sealed courtroom.
Yes.
But I think she should be charged an adult.
Well, I believe on this morning's news, which is still not, and that's the problem with news, especially with juveniles, you don't get a lot of information.
Right.
Because you're prohibited from that information. But they did say at the conclusion that if they choose to try her as an adult, obviously there'll be more information released. So.
Right, which I think they should.
I do. Look, if you could, 15 years old, you commit a murder, and you fatally stab someone, and it was multiple stab wounds.
Right.
And if you do something that heinous, you don't deserve the luxury of being able to get out of jail, because you stab a 68-year-old woman.
Yeah, you obviously have a lot of strength and courage there, don't you?
Yeah, and you should not be treated as a child. You should be treated as what you are, a murderer, or an alleged murderer, because, again, I don't want Steve running in the door if he can fit.
She's innocent until proven guilty.
That's right. Talking about the presumption of innocence, and we all know about the presumption of innocence, but it's out of control. The society is out of control now. There's no respect for adults, because on one hand, you want every child treated as an adult, and you want to sit down and have a dialogue with them. There's virtually no parental guidelines where a parent is teaching the child the social mores as they grow up, and they are answerable to their parent. Now they're not. They can divorce their parents. They can do whatever they want. But then when this happens, they want to be tried as juveniles. And drug dealers, by the way, do that all the time in big cities. They allow juveniles to do the drug dealing because they know if they get arrested, they cannot be sentenced like an adult. So the system's broken, and it continues to get worse. But again, Fall River hits the news for something negative, and well, Fall River did get something positive on the violent side. A UFC fighter fighting in his first UFC card on Saturday night in Melbourne, Australia, opened the main card, and he trains down at Regiment, down on Corey Street. Dan LePage is one of the people. I know him very well. His father's a firefighter. I know Dan also. And he got a first-round knockout. So they did say Fall River in a positive light.
Hey,
of course, it wasn't positive for the guy who got knocked out, but he did win a UFC fight. So a little bit of good news for the people at Regiment. Congratulations to him on his win. So
a lot of people in Fall River went to local restaurants and bars and whatnot and watched the fight.
Yeah, and well, it's a I mean,
it's a big deal for Fall River. It really is.
Well, yeah, and a lot of the people who train with him and train at Regiment, and even people who train in other venues, they're into it. There are a lot of people that go to the UFC, and knowing that someone from Fall River, and for his first bout, it's a relative rarity, probably because he was a heavyweight, but he was on the main card. Most of the time, you start on the undercard in a preliminary card that's on regular TV, but he actually opened up the pay-per-view section of the telecast. So he didn't get much airtime because it was a first-round knockout. But I guess
I bet you people are upset about paying for that pay-per-view.
I guess everybody was, all his teammates and people from Fall River should be happy for him. He obviously trained hard to go down there and get a victory. So kudos to him, and kudos to Regiment on their victory.
That's a long flight, let me tell you.
Oh yeah,
that's a very long flight.
Yeah, very very long flight. Yep, and absolutely. But then
it's DVT generating.
yeah, you cross the international date line, and then but. Now let's get to one of our favorite subjects. Judge Fall River firefighter Hetzler can take office if he wins re-election. Did you post the decision?
Yes.
So the decision is there to be
20
posted.
pages. It's 20 pages long.
I have it on my phone. We're not going to read you 20 pages, but what I found ironic is before I came to the show today, I was listening to the radio because I normally don't listen to the radio in the morning. I watch television. I watch the TV news, but I had both of them on because we have so much local news going on about everything. The mayor, the Hetzler case, the Jen Andrade, everything going on. And they had a sound bite from Joe Macy saying that, well, this is about whether it violates his constitutional rights. And of course, I think you discussed on our last show about how many cases, which obviously weren't relevant. Joe Macy took an inordinate amount of time trying to justify what the city's doing. And this is one of my problems with corporation councils, because they don't really work for the people. They're not really lawyers. They're a bunch of hired guns to fashion opinions for politicians, namely the mayor, whoever the mayor is, whether it was Frank for Carrere or any other lawyer that's a corporation counsel. The primary job is to justify even the most ridiculous outrages that are perpetrated on the voter. And as we said on the last show, before this decision, we felt it was a violation of his constitutional right. We wished him luck. He won. and good for him, because you know something? I think Joe Macy should have been out there when the charter was approved saying how bad this was, and there are many constitutional violations in this charter. Many, not just this one, many. And as I get, again, kudos to the only charter commissioner, Dan Robillard, but, and this came down to a fundamental issue of can public employees be discriminated against by the mere fact that they chose to work for the city of Fall River or the city of anywhere, the city of Natick or the city of Wellesley or the city of anything. And they do it routinely. You know, discrimination is outlawed against all kinds of groups except public employees. As I said on the last show, they can be enslaved and they can be told where to live and what to do. Actually, when I got on a fire department, you couldn't leave the city of Fall River without permission because you were an emergency personnel, without pay, by the way.
Serfdom wasn't as bad as being a city employee.
Yeah, you're right. And when I got on the job on 4th of July and major holidays, you were prohibited basically from leaving the city for 2 or 3 days, unless you had special circumstances. And of course, when I got to be president, I complained, as I always do, that was
such a thorn in the side.
Well, it's, you know, if you're going to have people on call, you have to give them some compensation.
Agreed.
Like, you know, if you're going to be on call, I said, you know, if you're going to have the entire fire department locked in their houses and can't leave the city for 3 days over 4th of July weekend, those were the days when on 4th of July we got 3, 4, 5,000 fires, 5 or 6 house fires going at one time. I remember when we had 5 house fires going, we got a lumber yard, and they had to take the pumps that were hooked up to the hydrants, have them hook a direct line to the hydrant, and go to the lumber yard fire. I remember when they used to throw tires over the hydrants and burn them so we couldn't hook up to the hydrants when they threw bricks and bottles at us. But you couldn't leave the city for 3 days because we were running constantly for 24 hours a day. And maybe they had justifiable cause to say everybody had to stay here. And that's fine. But if you're going to put everybody on call and bring everybody in, you have to pay them. So once they had to pay us, that was abandoned. And you weren't required any longer to be here. But that just goes to show the abuses you can take unless you rage against them, because they consider you a hostage, a slave, a public servant, which always disturbed me. I was a public employee. I performed the job. I was a professional firefighter. I was paid to protect lives and property, to go to fires, to go to hazardous materials incidents, and do my job. There are private, not many, but there are private fire departments. Those people don't have any of the requirements of public. And it always disturbed me when people say, you know, you're a public servant. I was nobody's servant. That is a term that is rather obsequious, in my opinion. So, and it demeans the service these people do. They do what they do. An FBI agent is a law enforcement officer. So that's just, you know, you people who want to say that, you know, we're servants, you can, but I don't. I strongly disagree. And I'm glad that Josh Hetzler won this case. If he gets reelected, he says, I am obviously extremely happy with the judge's decision, unquote. If re-elected, I look forward to the honor and privilege of serving, continuing to serve the children and families of Fall River. And I also hope this empowers other public employees to participate in local government without fear of discrimination, unquote. That's exactly on target. I hope it empowers other public employees. As I said, do you have restrictions? Yeah, Mr. Hetzler has restrictions, as will a school department employee or a department of any, but as do non-public employees. Cliff Ponte has restrictions on real estate issues that may come before it, or any other issue that could cause anybody monetary gain. So, as I said, this makes me pretty happy.
Well, you know, I read the decision, and like I said, 20 pages. You want to rip your hair out. And as many arguments as Joe Macy wrote in his brief for this, and there was a lot of, you know, legal cases that he quoted. The judge only quoted, I think, one or two, and that's it. And this proves that Joe Macy's opinions are opinions, and they're not valid. They're not valid for interpreting this charter. Nothing's valid for interpreting this charter. I mean, it's not worth the toilet paper it's written on.
Well, you know, opinions are like what you wipe with the toilet paper.
That's
Everybody
right.
has one.
Yeah.
Some work better than others. And we remember, and we cited on this show, Dominion. Mm-hmm. We remember the Dominion case. We sat in the city council and listened to our illustrious corporation counsel at the time, who was not Joe Macy, go on and on about the case law they had. The case law, the precedents, the sites, and what happened with that case? They lost it. They lost it. So
I loved it when they said
anything Joe Macy said contrary to what some city councilors want to do because they're too weak-kneed to stand up and say, with all due respect, Corporation Counsel Macy, all this is an opinion. And I disagree, so I'm going to vote for the people. They use that as a crutch to allow them to vote against the public interest. Well, Joe Macy said this was, and as I said on the show before this opinion was rendered, we need a judge that will look at the constitutionality. Because I don't care how many court cases have been decided, and as I said on the last show, there are many cases that are decided in favor, and they're not correct, because people do not have the money or the wherewithal to fight City Hall. And I believe truly that if every one of these cases was adjudicated to the max, they would all prevail as Mr. Hetzler did. Because let's face it, we live in the United States of America. The United States of America is a country that was founded on a simple premise. Government is of the people, by the people, and for the people. The people are the government. It says it in our Constitution of the Commonwealth and the Constitution of the United States. We are the government. And when the government isn't working for us, we're obligated, we're directed to change it. And so for anybody to say that politicians, a city, elected officials, has the right to tell a citizen, an individual who fashioned the opinion, are only substitutes and agents of the people they are supposed to represent, attempts to diminish their right to be not only a voter, but part of the government, is innately wrong. It's fundamentally wrong. It should not be allowed to exist. It's an injustice. And as Martin Luther King once said, and I'm paraphrasing, because when I quote, I make sure I'm reading it directly, an injustice to one is an injustice to all. And an injustice to Mr. Hetzler is an injustice to all public employees. And I'm glad he referred to them as public employees, because that's what they are. And they should have the same rights as every other group in the United States, because that's what this country was based on. It is a practice that should not be. Doesn't it say somewhere, if I remember right, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness?
Boy, you want everything, don't you?
Yeah. Well, suppose happiness is being part of the government.
That's right.
Happiness is not living in Fall River. I think a lot of people share that dream.
I was going to say that's a lot of people.
But happiness, so why can a governmental body require someone to live here? Why don't you make it attractive enough here to come here? See, that's the key. The politicians, when they can't figure out a way to fix this city, they're going to demand that everybody except them has to live in a community. Well, do you notice how many appointees do we have that even though the charter says they're supposed to be city employees, right?
Yep.
Don't we have somebody that's actually he's got the both ends of the apple? Isn't he an elected official in a community? Mm-hmm. Or was? Yep. I don't know if he still is. School committee?
Yep.
Wow, what an irony. School committee for Mr. Hetzler, school committee for an appointed employee that's supposed to live in a city, and how many years later, he still doesn't live in the city. So again, should he been required to move in a city? Yeah, then we had another debate on the constitutionality of our charter, because the reality is nobody should be able to tell you that. It shouldn't be in anybody's charter. Now, I don't have any problem at all having hiring preferences. If you say, okay, you can live anywhere you want, but if we get a qualified employee that's a Fall River resident,
they get the job.
They're going to get the job.
Yeah, and I don't have a problem with that either.
No, absolutely not.
I have no problem with that.
As a matter of fact, I would encourage that. And we have said that more than once on this show. When they hire somebody from East Overshoe for a job, or an ice house guard from Warwick, to be more, to cite an actual incident, Fall River, who lasted, all of about 2 weeks as the head of the department they hired him for. Yeah. But what did we say? We can't find someone from the city of Fall River who's working within that department, or somebody from the city of Fall River without...
Oh, come on.
Without the credentials to perform that job. And Hetzler was right when he said, I hope it empowers these people to participate and apply for jobs without fear of discrimination or prejudice, because we all know about the politics of hiring.
Yeah.
We know about the patronage.
Hence why we have the ice
we
house.
Get back to our bottom line, CJ. How do we cure it? Drain the swamp.
Yeah.
Vote them all out.
It's interesting, because this entire decision brought up some major questions of our charter. But one of the big questions that came up, because Joe Macy even presented this as an argument, on November 17th, I think it was the 17th, or November, whatever day it was that it was passed, November 2017, the people voted for this charter. This is the will of the people. It's amazing how it's the will of the people when it suits his argument nicely.
That's right.
Okay?
But it's a piece of garbage when, and he's going to misinterpret it like he did. They let him get in on the first term.
Well, yeah, because when you think about it, it says only one. You can only have one person serving on one board, and that's it. You can't serve on multiple boards. You can't serve on multiple commissions. But we have people doing that now.
Yeah.
And we've had people doing that because the mayor couldn't find enough people that he had in his pocket to put into those positions, so he didn't care. So Joe Macy wrote an opinion saying that doesn't apply.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't that opinion, when it talked about the city and Joe Macy's opinion, didn't it say about the rationale that he used to allow Hetzler to violate the charter to be sworn in for his first term?
Yep.
And he talked about how they weren't given enough warning and blah, which is baloney. Once it's the charter, it's the charter, it's the law. Even though it's unconstitutional, we knew it. And again, people started complaining about that charter the day after it was done, and now the people realize that they do what they do. Why do they vote for people who don't have their best interest? It's marketing. Politics is marketing. They marketed this charter. You had people like Mayoza and Bartley and all the rest of them, and we were the few people. You and I went to a few of those things and spoke in opposition to the charter. We were the few, the chosen few, the malcontents, the iconoclasts who went out and spoke against the charter. Then they all ran up to the microphone and said how wonderful this is, and it's in this charter, and we did this and we did that, and it's wonderful. Dan Robillard filed a minority opinion, but as you said, this is why lawyers are not well liked and politicians are not well liked. It's like they have no ethics. It's like they will use anything and they will manipulate the language to suit their agenda, not what's right or wrong for the people. As you said, Joe Macy has used the arguments both ways. He argued against the charter, then he argues for the charter because the people, it's the will of the people. Well, guess what? The will of the people doesn't override the Constitution.
That's right.
Because if they do something that's unconstitutional, that's why, I guess a lot of people don't realize that judges can actually set aside verdicts. If a jury comes in with a verdict that's obviously wrong, and all the evidence points that it's wrong, like our charter is, a judge can actually set aside a verdict.
That's right. That's right.
He can say, I don't care what the jury said. Fundamentally, these people are nitwits. The evidence is clear. I'm reversing. I'm setting aside the verdict. And that's what we have to do with the charter in the city of Fall River. And I know you said it in your weekend flush.
Yeah,
we need to get rid of this disaster.
And the sad part about it is this thing is coming up for review in a couple of years. And
who's going to review
2022. Well, they're political appointees, but one for the first charter review must be a charter commissioner, one of the original charter commissioners.
Yeah.
Well, if that's the case, I want Dan Robillard.
Yeah.
I want Dan Robillard. But you know who they're going to choose?
It won't be him.
No, they're going to choose Mike Mayoza or Chris Bartley.
Yeah, the chair or the co-chair. Yeah.
Right. And that's wrong.
And who appoints the people who are reviewing the charter?
City council and the mayor.
That's right. Politicians. That's what
right.
we said on the other show. This document flies in the face of the people's right to control their own destiny and with their charter. They even took away your right to fix this. That's why we have to throw it in the trash can, because it's not going to get fixed.
God forbid.
Because the same political hacks who created it will be on the committee to review it.
And that's going to be the problem. There's an argument already going on in Facebook about the recall provision. What city or town has a recall provision? And they're saying, well, they're not cities, they're towns. Doesn't matter. Their recalls have gone through with no problem whatsoever. How come Fall Rivers can't? Because it's not worded properly. Word it properly. And if you're going to review other charters to get it, or other laws, do it.
You don't have to. We all knew how to fix it.
Yeah.
We knew how to fix it. Dan Robillard knew how to fix it. And the reality is that there was no excuse not to fix it, because we had to deal with the fallout of the old charter and the old language in our recall.
Well, what's interesting is that according to one of the charter commissioners that's on there, he said on Facebook that Dan Robillard argued to keep the recall provision exactly the same way that it was and to not change it. I found that hard to believe. But
no, he argued against the new provision, and it had to be put in context. And I would invite that charter commissioner on, and we can have Dan
debate him.
debate him.
Yeah.
I am sure that Dan would. But you know something? Congratulations. The will of the people and their constitutional right to be part of our government, be our government, was upheld. So we'll see you on Wednesday.